House Beyond the Supernatural presents a behind-the-scenes podcast special, Anatomy of an Adventure, the Abandoned Bristol Hills Apartments. This episode is sponsored by several parties, including Palladium Books, Rainbow Press of Omaha, Nebraska, the Modern Floor Plan Products by Fable Environments, DriveThruRPG.com, the music of both the Shadow Symphony and Verse 13, Stada Designs, and by Nick Hankey Incorporated. You can drop that last one.
Yeah, I think it was...
But,
like, uh-oh.
No, here. The music of both Shadow Symphony and Verse 13 and Stada Designs. Alright, welcome everyone. This is the host of the House of the BTS, Steve here. This is coming as a special request. With me is Nick.
Hey.
You will probably recognize him as that smooth and sultry voice sounding parapsychologist, Dr. Peter Corrigan. He's here as kind of my special guest and here to offer insights and his own thoughts and questions and such as we go. But the long and short of this one, for those of you who have not listened to all of the episodes concerning the Bristol Hill Apartments, you should stop now and listen to, I think there's probably about, 4 episodes? 5 by the time that's done?
Yeah, I think there's going to be like 3 more that come out.
So, and I suspect this particular episode will probably not come out until those 3 do. It only makes sense, make sure those other 3 come out first, and this will. So those of you listening to this, if you have not listened to all of everything that went on at the Bristol Hills Apartments, stop now, because there's going to be spoilers here and background detail that will have no context to you until you've listened to all of said adventure. First off, since this is going to be all about the behind the scenes and kind of where my head was at and where I was going with all this as I was writing it, the first thing I should bring up is this adventure was actually something of a few years in the making. I try to keep a loose chronicle of all the events that have taken place in my games, the past characters that have taken part in it, and what they've done, and what the results and consequences of their action are. And on top of that, the worlds I build are always more expansive than what the players will ever see, and the events and things that are always happening behind the scenes or they're happening outside of their peripheral visions. So I've always got stuff cooking behind the scenes that the players just don't know about. My BTS games have been going since 2005 when the second edition book was released. And even then, way back when I started the first adventure, I already had the groundwork of some history and background stories and such installed on that first adventure that I had that group do for an investigation. Which, if memory serves, it was kind of a haunted redevelopment for an upcoming mall or so. A lot of the details are sketchy. I mean, that was 2005. And a lot's happened since. And what the point is, since in the very beginning, I already had backstories and several villains and such kind of already had things in various stages and plannings, and on top of all the random monsters and things that happen. It is a ponderous amount of information to keep track of, but it is just how I do it. Next, Dr. Baldwin is a little different from the other PCs in the podcast in that he has been in my BTS world since before the podcast started recording it. He's been in several adventures, he's done things and has made decisions and reactions during them, and there are results and consequences for his actions, as with any other player character. Such is the case of his wanting to look into the vampire he unknowingly had set free during what was basically a ghost hunt in an old building undergoing renovation. This vampire, whom we all know now as Julian, already had a backstory before his body was even discovered. I had intended to have the investigators confront or deal with Julian at some point, but I put him on the back burner as the podcast listeners wouldn't know his story, or really any context for him. I could say, eventually I could have said something like, well, after he was accidentally freed, or come up with whatever the hell story I felt like staying behind that. I just kind of put him on the back burner to start some other things that we currently have going now. However, After John had perished and Arnie had Dr. Baldwin return, Arnie specifically asked to look into this vampire as a loose end to tie up. So it was a great time to kind of get back into him and what I had cooking with that on the forefront. This also incidentally brought back an old NPC with private detective Abraham Capone, even if only in a cameo, to find this vampire. Abraham, I think he was the first or second, I'm going to say it, probably first handful of NPCs that I had ever written, going all the way back to 2005, and he was pretty much doing exactly like he was now. He was an NPC that the group could hire to do work, do some investigative work for him on the side if they were busy doing other things, or if they just kind of needed a hand for whatever investigative reason. So he's kind of come and gone throughout the game, so it's always fun for me to bring back somebody that I haven't seen in a while, and I'm kind of getting this extra thrill on the podcast. That is the first time I'm revealing any of. I think I've had the one Diviner NPC, and then Edmund, Hannah, and Kendra, and that's probably, I think, about it for NPCs. I don't try to make my cast too terribly large, because really it's all about the players. The hell with the NPCs. You guys are the ones that make it run. So
no, it's nice to see like old characters come back, because I'm thinking about bringing somebody else back in the future.
As a matter of fact,
and I keep dropping hints too.
I guess I've not picked up on those hints, so I'm just hearing some of that for the first time myself. You're hearing it here first, folks.
No, like I'm always sending like stuff off to the FBI for John Connor to look at.
Oh yeah, you do that.
And,
I didn't realize you were writing that in the idea of his potentially returning. Although I love the idea of him kind of being an NPC in the back now.
Yeah. That
you're right. In theory, he could easily come forward one day if something were to happen to Peter, or Peter needs a break, or if he's on the sidelines from injuries. I mean, you never know. I've always, and I know I told people since the very beginning that they should always have at least two characters available in case one happens to one of them. So, and yeah, I guess by that accord, yeah, John Connor is, he'd be right there waiting to go if needed. I was almost about to eat a chip there.
No, just like...
And that would have come off really weird on the microphone. I'll get back to that. I'll get back to those. The hell was I going with all? So anyway, I had this old NPC come by for a cameo to help Baldwin look for this vampire, and Abraham's cameo provided 3 important notes to really kick the adventure off. The first being that the vampire that he's looking for specifically is still in Seattle. Second, he seems to be living in an abandoned apartment building, and he's been doing things behind the scenes for the last several months since being freed. Whether, how much the players all took into those 3 particular items, that's you'd have to ask each player individually, but the important notes was that he's still here, and they had what looked like a base of operations for him, which really that's just the seeds of an adventure waiting to happen if Baldwin decides to go with it. And he did. Baldwin brought this information to the group, and they decided to go after him, well, right then and there. It was, I kind of admired the cojones of the idea, well, he's there, let's go after him. And that was really all I needed to get the adventure going. And as a reminder, I am a big fan of pre-planning adventures and campaigns, as it helps keep the continuity, it helps get the details right, and it makes chronicling the story a lot easier. Going in with a plan, even if the players almost seem like they're out to derail it, it's a lot easier to work with stuff and think by the seat of your pants if you have some kind of plan and knowing what's all's going to go down, or what you think might go down. And really, whatever it is, the individual monsters or masterminds and such are doing, it's one thing when you have if it's just a case of they're going in to clean out ghouls from a graveyard. I mean, anything that's like an instinctual primal creature, there's not a whole lot to state with those. They're there, they'll fight until they feel they can't win, or some are so or some brave or foolish, they'll generally fight to the death. I mean, those aren't such a big deal. But if you got people with if you're using individuals with a lot of intelligence behind them, which coincidentally vampires have always been one of my favorite villains to GM. If for no other reason, because as they were once human and they have retained a lot of their human intelligence, they think a lot smarter. They are far more cunning than the average monster. They understand how humans work and where their weaknesses and such are more than most others. And they also know how to take advantage of their group tactics and such. I've always loved using vampires in my games for reasons like that. However, as some of you, I hope you all might have noticed by now, I'm also really good at pointing out what the weaknesses of said villains and such are. Like, vampires are notoriously overconfident, and they have a whole ton of weaknesses on top of that. Garlic. You throw a pizza at them, it can terrify. Anyway. When I started writing this particular adventure, I had a few aspects that I wanted to focus on. First, I wanted to deliver the atmosphere of wandering an abandoned building at night. Next, I wanted to make sure I included at least one scene with an entity, as we have a ghost, as we have a psychic medium in the group. I always try to pay attention to what NPCs and such we have at any given time, and try to offer something for everyone. We do have two psychics in the group currently. We have the psychic medium and Cass, and Zia. She's she is a physical psychic, but really that's that doesn't make her a whole lot different than say like non-psychics, with the exception of the fact that she's a lot more physically capable of getting down, getting the fisticuffs down with the rest of them. So she's, and in Zia's case, Shannon, which I dig her brazenness with her, that she pretty much took everything across the board, all about making her badass. She really, dipped into the whole physical aspect of it. Which, as those of you that were listening to the episodes, has kind of come back to haunt her a little bit, as she's really not a whole lot prepared for the more mental psychic aspects but that's just kind of how physicals work. So, the last thing I really wanted to point out with this was that, I wanted the group to get a sense of how dangerous this adventure really was for them by the end of it. As GM, I will never tell anybody to or not to do anything. I knew they were kind of asking for trouble from the beginning, that, the odds of there being, a solitary vampire was probably going to be nil from the start. Vampires love hanging out in groups, but, I'm not going to sit there as their shoulder angel and say, I wouldn't do this or that or the other. I can kind of provide advice through the NPCs. I kind of did a little of that with Edmund before, as the adventure was beginning, but for the most part, I got to let the players, make their own and accept their mistakes, or whether it's a mistake or not, really, I guess is how it all plays out. But I knew this was going to be a dangerous thing for them regardless. And I wanted to hopefully get the help them understand, oh, yeah, we kind of kicked a hornet's nest by the end of this, and I think I did that. The group made the conscious agreement to enter a supposed vampire's lair in the middle of the night, without truly understanding that vampires work in groups and are among the most clever and cunning of supernatural enemies. I knew that it was a possibility that the entire group could perish, or end up becoming vampires themselves, completely lost to the cause. I have not had a total party kill in my game since 2007, and the way this group was going with this adventure, it could happen there. But again, as a GM, I try not to advise unless asked via skill rolls or the players talk to NPCs that could offer advice. I also wanted a way to convey that the players were. All right, Nick, edit here. Oh, okay, I wrote that instead of what. Okay, here we go. Nick, re-edit. I also wanted a way to convey what the players were seeing to the podcast listeners. I'm really trying to make an effort to cater to you, to the podcast listeners. as there have been, the few other podcasts I've heard elsewhere, they don't really seem to have any interest in helping the listeners kind of keep along with you and just kind of do their own thing. And it really gets to me and loses me when they're drawing maps with each other, but they really can't share with the listeners that way. So you're kind of... So yeah, if you guys look around this corner and this... that just drives me up a wall. So I really didn't want to do that to you guys. Because I love you guys. What can I say? I'm a giver. And so I really wanted to convey, what the players were seeing, and that led me to using one of the modern floor plans, specifically the apartment complex from Fabled Environments. I have purchased a lot of designs on the drive-thru-rpg.net site. Usually, Fabled Environments is usually having like bundle sales all the time of various floor plans that they have. So I don't recall if you can kind of like keep a watch on these items, or if you, but they usually send out newsletters of things when they're out there. And most of them are actually just ridiculously easily priced. You can usually get a map for like a couple of bucks, and you can just kind of buy in piecemeal as you need them. But anyway, I got a whole bunch of them, and I like to use them every chance I get. And these plans also had an added bonus that there were furnishing illustrations in them. I could have in theory told the group to simply ignore the furnishings and left the building empty, or simply remove them via Photoshop, but that would make for a boring place to investigate. So I had the idea that Bristol Hills was advertised as furnished apartments to cater to bachelors and new couple types to rent short-term as desired. And when the apartments were condemned back in the 90s, the owner just left all the furniture in the rooms. I saw all sorts of potential with making use of the furniture, and I know I included a lot of the furniture as flavor text moments and bits and pieces throughout the game, and I'll kind of talk about that a little more as I go. I also like the idea of keeping the building to a smaller 8-apartment building, as that was more of the style of how apartments were built back then. And it would also keep the adventure from dragging on too long. So, yeah, welcome to the 15th floor, everyone. What are you going to do now? I think I'm going to puke and take a nap. I'm so tired of this. Anyone remembers the staircase scene in Ghostbusters, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Now, on to the beginning of the adventure. I'm not going to try to read all my stuff verbatim, but there are bits and pieces that kind of help you keep along with what I was thinking when I was designing some of this. So some of this I'm going to have to just kind of reread, even though you heard it in the adventure earlier. So bear with me on that. So at the beginning of it, again, at the very beginning of it, I was all about trying to get flavor text, which is a big part of my GM style. I love giving flavor text for a game, and even though it's not entirely necessary as some other games like D&D and more fantasy settings, because we're all pretty familiar one way or another with what modern environments look like. We live in them. But I still like to try to set the tone to help, get everyone who's listening, behind the same vibe and atmosphere that I'm going for. So right from the first paragraph or two, I'm already hitting that pretty hard. Taking it left at the corner, it's late evening and raining when you can see the Bristol Hills apartments down the street from the warm and dry comfort of your vehicles. The pale yellow illumination of the streetlights does nothing to complement its visage. The word ruined would best describe your impression of it. At one time it would have been called economic, later it would have been called vintage. Today it is a virtual ruin. Pulling up to the curb to get a better look, light rain trickles down its graffiti-covered walls, over mounds of trash, dried leaves, and the long-neglected shrubbery of the small courtyard in front of the old apartment complex. While every window of the 4-story building has been boarded up from the inside, the first 2 floors have security bars over them as well. The broken remains of wood planks lie scattered around the front entrance. The front door itself rests open a crack as if inviting any passerby to enter freely and unafraid. A large brown, half-drenched rat scurries along the outside wall before disappearing into the dark shelter of the building. So, again, this was all about the atmosphere, detailing what detailing that they are not in the best part of the city and they're about to enter a building that is not safe to be in. The wood planks in the ground and open door was meant to reveal that people have broken into the building before. The note about inviting passerbys to enter freely and unafraid is a Dracula reference, which was fitting to me as they're here for a vampire. Let's see here. Edmund opens an umbrella and exits the car, standing in the rain as he asks to talk to Zia for a moment, leaving the rest of you to get your gear together. What are you taking inside with you? My group usually learns pretty early on that this is kind of one of my staples of GMing. I like to give the players a chance to collect their gear and thoughts before an adventure begins. To me, it kind of helps avoiding any real kind of railroading, as I have no clue ultimately what they're going to take in with them or what it is that they think they're going to go with. And it helps me to make sure they don't feel like they're going in completely unprepared for something. And it also kind of gets them talking with each other about what it is they want to do, even if it is only through the gear that they're taking in with them. Are we going in hot? Are we going to go in quiet? Or how are we feeling about this? That kind of camaraderie is generally what I look for when I ask these kind of questions. So I always make it a point to ask, what are you all taking in with you? You newbie GMs out there, I strongly advise you do a similar thing with that. Edmund talking to Zia was kind of the bypass, the point that Shannon was not going to be able to play that night, but she still wanted Zia to be there for when she did return, so I specifically set it up that while those two are talking, the other three can keep amongst themselves and discuss. And then after the gear was set up, I wanted some flavor text with Peter, as he had new gear to work with. And that's when I went in with this. While situating the oddball helmet on your head, Hannah checks your radio signal. While doing so, Edmund makes his way over to you. Peter, I want you to know that I will not be going in with you. I will be staying here with Hannah, keeping in radio contact with you. That really shouldn't have come as too big of a surprise to anyone. I mean, Edmund's, again, he's mid-60s, 2 bad knees, has he basically has given up the use of 2 good knees, and he has had a pacemaker added to him, and he looks about a dozen years older than he really is. I mean, the guy has basically been a lifer as far as paranormal investigating goes, and it shows. The guy's a mountain of information, experience, and history, but physically he has no business to be involved in any of this anymore. But I still kind of like to remind people that A, he's not coming in, but B, he's going to be keeping in radio contact, so should any of the group have any questions that they can't answer, aren't sure about, or just kind of need that GM angel on their shoulder, what have you, they have him to talk to. And as always, I pause to let Peter respond to this information before getting an opportunity to give a quick warning through Edmund. This was kind of my last offering of what would be any kind of real warning before they finally go in. So through Edmund, I had this to add. I also want you to understand the situation. Vampires are one of the most dangerous supernatural enemies one's likely to confront. They are fast, they are strong, they are psychic, and they were once human, meaning they understand our weaknesses and limits better than most. But most importantly, they can turn you into one of them. Never underestimate a vampire. Even a single vampire can be a match for anyone. So, my goal with that was I wanted to try to offer this advice in such a way that Edmund's not only saying how dangerous this mission is, but in a way that shows that he has past experience with them. And in fact, kind of a behind-the-scenes note for you here, Edmund has lost friends and colleagues while dealing with vampires in the past. Another quick factoid, Edmund was created and added to my game after the before-mentioned total party kill as an experienced and guiding voice of both warning and advising the group. So really that's kind of this was just kind of his wheelhouse, that he's gonna say something. I had a really rash young group that was used to playing riffs before they kind of dove into BTS, so really their answer to, they were all hammers and everything was nails. And that was kind of ultimately what led to the total party kill, because those hammers ran into a bunch of bigger hammers. So, after that had happened and everyone had to come up with completely new characters and such, I felt having a guiding voice, opportunity behind them, that is where Edmund actually got his start. So it just seemed right doing it again here. Also, to cover my bases, I had info on my sheet concerning a rear entrance to the building, but as it turned out, I never needed it. The point, or why I bring that up, is it's good. It's good for you GMs to think about whatever multiple entrances the group might enter to go into a building. Just because this door was sitting there wide open for them, I wasn't entirely sure they would take that. That they might have seen that as way too inviting and maybe would have come in through a rear entrance, which really in the end wouldn't have made that big a deal because it still would have brought them right back to the hallway and the stairs and such. But I made sure to notice so they didn't think that, oh, well, you're going through the back, I don't know what to do with that. No, I always try to think about what players might try to do. It doesn't always work. Players, you guys, everybody at this table still finds ways of totally catching me in angles I never would have thought of, which is great because I've been doing this almost 30 years now, so it's it's man, holy shit, 30 years. I've been doing this since I was about 15, so that means, next year I'll be doing this about 30 years. So, man, that's what, 2/3 of my life right there. God damn, I'm feeling old. If my 15-year-old self could be talking to my 45-year-old fat ass today, I'm sure I'd have some interesting things to tell him, like, don't take that bet in high school, man, for starters. He'll know what I'm talking about. And then I'll explain to him why when I was sitting in the tub one day when I realized I was destined for greatness, but he wouldn't have been ready to hear that yet, so I probably wouldn't have. Quick break. Nick, edit here. I didn't think about time. There was any time constraints to this, but I don't think you're going to be really doing any sound effects or anything extra to this. There's no need for it, so you probably don't care how long I talk, huh?
Nope. That's fine.
I was like, do I need to break this up? Or I was like, nah, you see, I don't think you're going to have to edit a whole lot here.
Minimum editing. Yeah, so it'll be fine.
Not to mention, you probably, I'm going to do most of the yakety schmack anyway, so, people might get tired of hearing me by the end of this, but screw it, they asked for it.
Yeah, you asked for this.
You asked, you're getting it all. You called down the thunder, here's the boom! All right, Nick, edit here.
Let's break down episode 1, season 1, all the way through.
Holy shit.
No.
And I keep chronicles of all my crap, and quick side note to that, depending on how this goes in the end, if I felt this went pretty good or whatnot, I had actually considered doing another anatomy of an adventure by going into the cemetery that the group went through on their very first adventure. And future stuff I might do this with too, but let's see how I get through tonight first, and if you guys even like what you're hearing before I go that route. Again, always feedback and information is needed, you guys. We got, I podcast for you guys as much as I do the players. So anyway, they decided to go through the front door, so I went into more flavor text, and memory serves, I think Peter went in first, and so he got a flavor text note from me. As Peter pushes on the ajar entrance door, it swings inward with a rusty, exaggerated creak. The open door reveals a pitch-black hallway into the unknown. Everyone will need light sources to safely venture further in. This is another common aspect of my GM work. I like to make sure the group or the players are fully aware of what their lighting situation is. It affects not only what it is they're carrying in their hands, it affects their perception rolls, and it affects what they might or might not be able to see at a given time, such as a monster lurking outside the beam of a flashlight, for example. Once they have all responded about their light sources, I continued. All the signs of being derelict, run down, and neglected are here, and trash lies everywhere. Aging yellow paint is peeling off every wall you can see. Signs of water damage and mold permeates various places. Water drips randomly from dark patches along the ceiling. Falling debris looks to be a concern. Much of the exposed wood is rotting and looks like it will not support the weight it used to. On one of the hallway walls, someone named Kilroy wanted everyone to know that he or she was here at one time. Quick side note to that, any Styx fan or World War II history buff would be familiar with my Kilroy was here reference, because that's just how I roll. I'm a Styx fan as much as a history buff, so domo arigato. Remnants of what used to be a tenant mailboxes are still here. All 8 of the mailboxes look to have been pried open by curious parties. Their warped and bent open covers open ajar, revealing empty spaces inside the boxes. Lastly, there are 2 open doorways to the apartments on the first floor and a set of stairs that leads to the second floor. They're covered in layers of dust, dirt, and trash. So, after the general flavor text, I gave a note to both Nick and Kirk to read and respond to. I used to do this all the time in my games. I would give players snippets of info rather than reading or going over everything out loud with everyone. However, I don't think this works quite as well in a podcast setting, especially when the player says nothing about it, which, not to throw anybody under the bus, but we have had a player that has done that, keeping all the information to himself or to a minimum, and that kind of makes for bad podcasting. So I've really kind of curled back on that unless I felt it was important, and also I would ask that they would kind of use in their own words through their through the filter of their character's mouthpiece what it was, the information that was conveyed to them. But specifically in this case, for Peter, it was stepping inside the front door of the building, a sensor whines in your earpiece while the EMF meter display on your HUD begins to fluctuate and act sporadically, well above what should be a baseline reading for a building with no power. And to Cass, I gave this note: you feel a slight psychic adrenaline rush when you step inside the building, creating a times 2 adrenaline bump. Psychic adrenaline bump, Instinctively taking in the smells of the complex, you can detect a few olfactory omens amongst all the normal smells. The normal smells include the rain outside, a mildew odor mixing in with the heavy dust, and while the omens include a light scent of incense as well as garlic. Right now, our most psychic sensitive one of the bunch is the medium, and I love making use of the olfactory omens that Cass has for that very reason. He is a great way to kind of give, early warnings or just kind of early notes and help kind of add on to what's going on. So the referencing all the normal smells, as well as the light sense of incense, gives him a fair warning that there are entities present in this building. Not necessarily dangerous, but they are present. As well as garlic, which is a common statement for vampires. If he wasn't smelling that early on, the group might even had a reason to say, I don't think he's here because he's not smelling anything. We can get out of here. But point is, this is where pre-planning also kind of comes in. We're thinking about what it is that your players have. Make sure you're providing them, if you got a medium in the group, make sure they're doing medium stuff. That, I guess, is really what it comes down to. You got a tech head coming in with a giant eyeball helmet, make sure his eyeball helmet's doing techie stuff. That's really what this is all about. To kind of accentuate the note of what he's smelling, a moment or two later, I noted to Cass that you can see a few softball-sized orbs floating lazily about the hallway. Looking at the stairway to the second floor, you hear an auditory reading of someone wearing heavy work boots slowly thudding their way upstairs. There's a lot of old memories in this building. Again, really trying to drive home both the flavor text and the fact that there's just a lot of entity activity going on in this old place. I don't get on Kirk as much about auditory reading materials as I should. That's something that's supposed to be more of a voluntary he has to invoke kind of a thing. And I might work with him or kind of offer him more guidance on that in the future, because there is a lot of details I've included in a lot of my past games that if he did auditory readings, there's things that he would have picked up on that he couldn't have gotten otherwise. And this one I just kind of gave it as, I kind of gave him this slight bit as a freebie, hoping, maybe that'll encourage him to do more of that. So, something to work with Kirk in the future. Or maybe Kirk's just never going to get into the auditory. That's, it's his character. That's completely his discretion. I'm never going to railroad you guys into using your abilities. unless I think there's a good reason for it. Like someday, he's been able to avoid. If Kirk's listening, I guess this is fair warning to you. Someday you've been able to avoid having seances with Kirk yet, but probably someday you're gonna have seances, just to be able to get information that you're not gonna be able to get in any other fashion. So that day's coming, Kirk. Be ready. And while those two were reading the notes that I had given him, I didn't want to leave Arnie hanging, so I gave him an opportunity to take in some info that reflects his skill set. So I kind of added this note, and I added this note to read to him, where it was, your perceptive nature and talent for crime scene investigation observes signs of previous urban explorers, squatters, the homeless, graffiti artists, and gang activity. In the hallway alone, you spotted animal bones, dried blood, empty alcohol bottles, several of which are broken, and the glass crunches under your footwear, discarded hypodermic needles and syringes, both plain and colorful graffiti, and structural integrity problems. I didn't make him roll perception on any of this. That seemed kind of a silly thing. Baldwin, as a genius, has a lot of different skills available to him, and he's also got a pretty high perception roll. So some of this I already know. If you haven't heard this from a previous podcast of mine, I do encourage players giving me a copy of their character sheets, and to kind of help with that, I'll usually help them update their sheets. I don't do that in any sort of capacity that I'm trying to take advantage of what they have or don't have. Honestly, the most important aspect to me is keeping track of what psychic abilities they have, so I know where to add stuff potentially in my game, and so I know what skills they have. Palladium Books, probably more than any other game that I've known, really likes making use of a whole plethora of skills, and I fully applaud that, because I think that's one of the best ways of really adding character and detail to what it is your character is about, just by the skills that he has. And I take pride in the fact that no matter how eclectic a skill might be, I have always been able to find uses for even the most eclectic of the skills that we have on our skill list. I mean, people are like, well, why the hell would we even have read English with a skill percentage? It's like, well, first off, the read English, part of it's just a statement of how well, if it's your first language, how high up on the level is it? It might just be like, hey, you can read cursive at a certain percentage. I mean, it's things like, or I would also have, like, if you're trying to read someone's absolute chicken scratch, I might have you make a read English roll with a negative on, just to make sure you can even read what the hell this guy has. I think Nick might have been with me when one of the Rifts games I had where we went to the Deep South. Were you one of the characters in that when I was doing Rifts back then?
No, we did the dinosaur swamp.
That's the one. And if his name escapes me, but the guy was playing like a swamp stomper, and he had that whole "I'm there, don't hang in, Cajun tight," and he always talked like that. And sometimes when I, as a GM, had a hard time understanding him, I would make the rest of the group, all right, can you guys even understand him? Make a percentage roll on your understanding American. And it was, it was funny, but it also kind of made a lot of sense, because sometimes, I had an NPC who was there, this he was Alarmac, one of my favorite NPC creatures. He was Alarmac in Tanner, and half the time when he's like, I swear that guy's not speaking American. I always find ways of making use with these skills, and so I know what skills Baldwin has, and I'm not going to make him roll for him. This is info I'm going to give him freely, while the other two are reading their notes. With the one exception of, when I get down to the last sentence, it was, lastly, a demon summoning circle has been painted on one of the walls in the hallway. I did have him examine that wall with a couple of skills, and to where, I gave him a bonus, because by the end of it, they're obvious fakes. It's more graffiti at best. They're not real demon summoning circles. It was just graffiti artists or dumb kids thinking they're humorous, kind of a thing. But it kept Arnie involved with it, with his skill rolling, and it gave the other two time to read their stuff in private and then respond in, whatever method that they wanted to respond in. So, once that happened, I like peppering in little bits of flavor text in between things, so I had a bit here was, several gnats began swarming around all your heads as Zia utters a yuck as she exaggeratedly stomps on a cockroach skittering by her boots. Again, this note was to remind players that Zia was there, if only in the background. I don't try to get, NPCs that I'm babysitting while the players are gone too involved, but I like to add moments that they know she's still there with them. And then I had everyone attempt a psionics check. And let's see here. I don't recall who saved or not, but I had everyone attempt a psionics check, and then I stated if you were successful, make a perception roll. And if somebody had rolled a 17 or higher, and this is kind of going from the perception check info in the back of the book, if they were 17 or higher, I had a note for them that a chill runs down your spine, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Your skin feels like it's crawling. You can't help but feel like you're being watched. On the surface, nothing happened with anyone regardless of what it was they rolled. Once somebody mentioned to keep investigating or brought up that both apartment doors were open, I had the next bit of flavor text ready to keep the game rolling for that. From an observatory glance from the hallway, it looks like both apartments are furnished, and when the building was condemned, the owner left it all here. Since being condemned, however, various trespassers have made use of the furnishings in various ways. For example, a dining room chair facing you sits just inside the open doorway of apartment 1A, blocking the entrance. Looking past this chair, another chair lies in vandalized pieces on the floor. The dining room table itself has been flipped upside down. From here, I felt that there was enough building flavor text that I can now start concentrating on the apartments themselves. And the first apartment that they investigated was important as it would set the tone of all the apartments visually. And as is common on the bottom floor of a condemned building, and I can kind of say this with some certainty because I've incidentally watched a lot of urban explorer videos and even done a little myself back in the day. So it's generally what you'll find out is the lower and the easier the access it is to a building, the more you're going to find graffiti and destroyed crap just around it for whatever reason. But in the case of like in Seattle here, this was brought up specifically when I was talking to the Underground Passage folks that when you go into a lot of these buildings, that's the same issue that you'll run into it there. But you'll have a lot less water damage on the bottom floor. It's usually you'll see the higher up you go in the floors, the water damage and more crumbling wood and such becomes ever present and becomes more dangerous. So really a lot of explorers only go up so far, and then after that they're really starting to risk their lives. Because I guess there is a lot of tetanus shots that get delivered in emergency rooms because a lot of these explorers will just fall through a floor and end up landing on rusted nails and crap. I mean, it's a scary thought, but it happens. So, apartment 1A and B had the most vandalized damage, but the least water damage, and regardless of which one they checked, their descriptions were nearly identical. It was when the bedroom of 1A is checked that something paranormal happened. And as memory serves, everyone kind of did like a quick sweep of various areas in the apartment, so I kind of went down the list with them, what they found in the dining room, living rooms, kitchens, which really was, things like rat droppings littered the countertops and the floors, the oven and dishwasher are missing, utility room had notes that, there's a washer and dryer that must be more than 40 years old, probably too much trouble, not enough value to remove, more rat droppings. Rat droppings is a common thing I bring up in my games, if only because we're based out of Seattle, and if anyone knows anything about the rodent problems in Seattle, they are generally an ever-present thing. I have heard tales about how bad the rodent problems are in Seattle when I was up there, and it was kind of a terrifying thought. So I made sure the group knew that, the rat problems were present, although no one ever actually brought it up, that for all the rat droppings I had brought up with everyone, there really was a lack of rats to actually be seen in the group, and I was wondering, I was hoping somebody would bring that up or notice it.
I did.
Did you steer it?
Yeah, we were like, has anybody seen any rats around here?
I don't seem to remember you bringing that up, but if you did, I would have given you props on that, because that was actually kind of a clue.
You did.
Cool.
You were like, that's why I write this stuff in here.
It seems I well, I get hit in the head a lot, so I forget.
I also
things.
listen to it a lot.
Yeah, I'm not gonna argue with the guy that edits them. No, I didn't. Yes, you did.
Yeah.
No, you did.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. Yes, you did. Well, you want to hear it? It's kind of pointless arguing with you, Nick. Way to take all the fun out of arguing. Alright, so anyway. So I guess I did, but specifically later on, I guess I probably didn't bring it up then when that was pertinent, because one of the most common things that vampires do, or one of their most common traits that they have access to, is that they control vermin, everything from like bugs and rats and rodents and what have you. And as the group eventually kind of came later on the notice, Julian isn't quite exactly what they were probably expecting to find in a vampire, and he's actually kind of keeping a clean house, especially when they saw him on the 4th floor. And yeah, the vampires are actually kind of making it a point, since they've started arriving, that the rat population has been a lot more controlled there and kept out, because really Julian, for reasons that the group doesn't understand yet, he doesn't seem to be quite the typical vampire. But anyway, yeah, when they get to the bedroom, bugs crawl along the walls and across the filthy full-size mattress that's been pulled halfway. That's pulled halfway off the box spring. The empty drawers of the dresser have all been pulled out and thrown aside. Splotches of dried blood spatter the dirty carpet in places here. A pair of bifolding closet doors are shut tight, and both bedroom end tables have been placed in front of them. Cass, actually got like a ghostly moment of activity here, and I spoke to him. Cass, you heard something. Maybe it was a growling sound? There, you heard something again. Is that a cat? It sounds like it's coming from the closet. And I had a note for Peter, again, with as he's got new toys to work with now, where your EMF meter fluctuates somewhat when you look towards the closet doors. And I don't remember if it was Cass directly, but somebody had asked to move the end tables aside and open the shutter doors, and that's where I went to Cass. Something blurs out of the darkness of the closet, coming right at you. And I gave him a moment to respond, and it said a tabby cat lands nearby you and darts towards the bedroom door. As you watch it run away, it blurs and vanishes from existence. And then I looked to the rest of the group. The closet is empty, save for the skeletal remains of a long-dead animal, possibly a cat. And then I asked a perception roll for I had a perception roll made for everybody but Cass, to where those were looking. Looking at Cass, you notice that he's staring at the skeleton as if entranced by it. Kind of a note here, I had planned to pass a note to Cass to read all the information himself, but I changed my mind kind of at the last minute, as I felt that the information I was presenting might have been interesting enough for all the players, as well as you podcast listeners to hear, so I opted to read it all out loud, which, if you don't recall, Cass was hit with kind of a psychic vision at this point, where after the cat fled the room, you look back into the closet, seeing the skeleton on the floor for the first time. When you do, you are overcome with a wealth of psychic vibrations, hearing a cacophony of sounds rushing past you as if someone were fast-forwarding an audio tape. Most of it's muffled and pushed into the background, barely distinguishable. But then you hear a clear selection of sounds, voices, and words. The sound of a cat running into the bedroom, a pair of young men laughing in pursuit. A cat hisses and growls. Someone says, "Hey Jim, throw him in the closet. Lock it in there." Sounds of objects being dragged. More mean-spirited laughter. A cat meows and scratches at a door. More cruel laughter that ends abruptly. Whoa, what the hell are you? Fast footfalls. A mix of disgusting squishing and crunching sounds. A man screams out in terror before being cut short by a biting sound. Deep gulps. A beating heart slows down, and then it stops. 3 different pairs of footsteps exit the room. I could have just had all him kind of hear and read all that for himself, but really, I wasn't entirely sure how Kirk could have conveyed all that without reading it word for word back to everyone what it was he was experiencing. And again, I felt there was enough info that I just, in this case, I wanted to make sure the podcast listeners weren't missing out, so I just read that out loud to everyone. But it's, and again, I think I probably mentioned it before, but I added a note here that this is a good time to mention that I love the Psychic Medium's auditory reading ability, and I saw this as an opportunity to present a few clues to Kirk and the others about what's been going on in this building. And however, I gave just enough to draw conclusions without specific answers. This is one of those abilities that I hope Kirk gets more involved with. There have been several times in my game notes where he could have used it, and I've tried dropping hints about the possibility of using this ability, but I try not to force anything on him. And yeah, when I say without drawing conclusions, specific answers, I could read this as that could be vampire activity, or that could even be a monster. That could have been a monster that encroached on him. It could have been a necromancer turning him into the undead. I mean, there are really a lot of different ways you can read that particular bit, and I was going to leave it to everyone to kind of draw their own conclusions on that. And then after that happened, I had everyone make another attempt to say versus psionics, and if they were successful, they would make a perception roll. And again, with a 17 or higher, a chill runs down your spine, the hairs on your neck standing up. Again, you can't help but feel like you're being watched. And after that bit, once they checked out the other apartment, if they hadn't already, once the first floor apartments were checked, nothing else to do but head to the second floor. So, a little bit of flavor for them. Making your way to the top of the steps, you realize the condition of the second floor is even worse than the first floor. Beyond all the ruin and trash and graffiti, all the falling debris, crumbling plaster and wood structures and rotting floorboards means that finding a place to step onto without the threat of a nail in your boot will be quite the exercise. The door to apartment 2A is wide open, while the door to apartment 2B is closed. Nick, edit here. Maybe you're enjoying the quiet. Maybe you're just as interested in what I have to say as the rest. I don't know. Maybe you're like, God, is he ever going to shut up? And I would understand if you said that. God, does he ever shut up? I know he was going to talk to the podcasters all night. I wouldn't let him forward. All fucking night. It didn't stop. Alright, Nick. Re-edit here. So, looking back on my notes, this was kind of an interesting behind-the-scene bit for everyone here. I had planned in my notes to have moments where parts of the floor were giving out under the PCs, but I kind of held back, as I continued writing on my my adventure for this, because I was kind of like, this group's kind of in a seriously dangerous situation enough as it is, without them risking foot injuries and getting rusty nails through their feet or falling through the floor or whatever else might have come at them. So I decided to hold back and save that for better timed adventures, as it were. But since we're here in the nature of behind the scenes, as an example of how this was going to work, I'd ask a player at random via my making a dice roll to make a perception roll. And if failed, I'd read, a section of floorboard beneath your feet begins to crumble and disintegrate, threatening to injure or even send you crashing through the floor. Make a dodge roll to find better footing, fast! And if failed, then I'd say, your foot goes through the crumbling floorboard, landing awkwardly on the support beams underneath, twisting your ankle at an awkward and painful position. You're going to walk with a limp for the time being, suffering a -1 to all your movement and combat actions until further notice. And maybe if, as we had a medic in the group, he might have had pain meds or, other ways of getting around that and whatnot. Or I might even have, they rolled like a natural 1, they might have fallen entirely through the floor and, additional penalties would accumulate. So I've done stuff like this in the past. I don't know if I've done it with the podcast listeners, but it'll certainly come back again, because this will not be the last, abandoned dangerous place that the group will find themselves in. There's plenty of that out there. And unfortunately, that's where the supernatural likes to hide, so that's where they go. And also, while my players know full well that when they can't attend, but still want their PCs to be present, that their characters are still subject to whatever dangers the others confront. And I kind of felt that Shannon, Shannon's character might have ended up with a seriously raw deal by taking foot injuries as well as suffering the ISP loss that she was about to experience on the second floor. So again, I decided to save these dangers for other adventures. So instead, Cass and Peter, I handed each of them a note again to kind of read and take in and kind of relay in their own words. Such as like with Cass, you can see several more orbs floating in the hallway here. However, they seemingly float about with more vigor than the ones you saw downstairs. You can also detect a new olfactory omen in the air. It is the smell of rotting human flesh. And for you podcast listeners who don't know, the smell of rotting human flesh means murder, death, and corpses. This was, for me, I added this as a premonition to not only the harmful entity scene that was about to take place, but also to represent, the dead junkie that they were going to find in one of the apartment buildings. Again, I love these pre-premonition-y kind of things to help kind of get their minds on where it is that I'd like them to go. So the olfactory omen is a great way of getting that. And then on Peter's hand, it was your helmet's limited field of vision requires you to look down intently to avoid stepping on a nail or falling through the floor. In the middle of a step, a sensor whines in your earpiece while the EMF meter displays on your HUD fluctuates. Then, for a moment, you hear what sounds like a woman sobbing in your earpiece before it's drowned out by static. I had that added specifically as another type of premonition to the harmful entity scene that was about to take place. I'm a sucker for EMF static bits and pieces and things that are picked up on sound recordings. I don't recall if he was taking video recordings at the time, but if he was, eventually, if and when he looks at it, I usually sometimes he'll get a burst of static where he's not getting much, and he might get a quick scene of like a quick flash of I think Melanie was her name, a picture of a vision of her, or perhaps even her husband or what have you. Bits and pieces like that. I love adding them in for tech. At least when it comes to entities. And entities, to me, are in my game, entities and ghosts and such are one of the most prevalent things that goes on in a BTS world, and I feel that's actually a pretty fitting thing to do in a modern game setting. You might disagree, but I love having them. Coincidentally, if should given time and chance and opportunity, one day you may all be looking at a smaller source book written by yours truly that has detail all about ghosts and entities, and probably goes into like parapsychology toys and various bits and pieces, and ways of how to get ghosts to get a little more, how to get ghosts a little more lively in your games, if that makes sense. Then I had the group attempt one more psionic save and noted the results. If memory serves, the players did well enough that they weren't affected by the hypnotic suggestions of the entities on this floor. I had planned to have a note available for those who both saved the psionic and made successful 17 perception rolls. This was a sort of retelling of the perceived supernatural involvement notes on page 170. But in the end, I felt that the group's kind of been doing this long enough now that I really don't need to relay the basic info anymore, so I scrapped that note to hand to them. But just for you listeners, and since I had it here in my notes, I thought I'd give you a neat little behind-the-scene clip of those that had successfully saved against the supernatural, perceiving a supernatural involvement bit. I had this for them. So again, perception of 17 or higher, they would have got this note. While 90% of the human race adamantly denies the existence of magic, demons, and the supernatural, buried in the back of our minds is a racial memory that they are all real and very deadly. This buried instinct is tied to our flight or fight response. That's why virtually all of us, at some point in our lives, have felt fear when all alone in the middle of the night for no apparent reason, and dislike the dark in general. Oh, we're not talking about the nightlife, clubbing, and the bright lights of the big city after dark. We're talking about those quiet moments when you're all alone and the hairs in the back of your neck rise up without reason and a chill runs down your body as if the icy hand of death brushed against your skin. You suddenly feel scared and creeped out, experiencing a gut feeling that someone or something was watching you. You're experiencing that feeling right now. It overwhelms you briefly and then lets up. Was this simply a moment of irrational fear or something more? A kind of sixth sense, perhaps? A buried instinct kicking in to alert you to a supernatural evil? So basically, it was more of a kind of a flavor text, but it's really more aimed at beginners, and this group's been doing it long enough that I decided not to get involved with that. Kind of a quick side note to that too. Looking in the darkness and using using lights and darkness is something else I'd really like to get into in the future with my with my scribes, whether it's through a Rift or one of the source books coming up. Because I don't think there's really enough information brought out about that. Because we really, as in our modern day society, we easily forget just how dark everything really is. And well, point is, it's something that deserves more going into, but this is not the right podcast for that. So, and with apartment 2A, when they went to that door, and I think that was the open one, the door to the apartment is wide open. An awful decomposing smell can be detected coming from it. I wanted the scene with the dead junkie in this apartment for two reasons. One, it gave the non-psychics a chance to stretch their investigative muscles via their skills, as well as give Cass an opportunity to talk to him via a seance if he desired, which in the end either he passed on or didn't consider it. And number two, it allowed just enough time to pass where the group wouldn't notice that Zia was under the hypnotic suggestion of the entities in the apartment across the hall that was now walking, and she was now walking into that apartment. In retrospect, I wished I'd written a blurb about it happening in a meanwhile scene, but as Zia wouldn't have had any recollection of the experience, a third-party point of view to me wouldn't seem quite as effective. So I kind of wish I had, but really it wouldn't have come out as well as I'd hoped anyway. There's always next time. Should Shannon be here and Zia falls under psychic influence, as she seems prone to happen, perhaps that's a good time to do it then. Not that she's the only one. So, when they get to the bedroom, I had a note, a dead body. There is a dead body in the bedroom, and I had everyone roll a horror factor of 10. Really, something I want to get into in the future more, as well as that there's horror factors, and then what I have referring to as fear factors. Seeing a dead body in this group, depending on their level of experience, kind of teeters a line between horror factor versus fear. Because horror factor, that when you see a dead body, horror factor almost it dictates enough that you might just go running, fleeing in terror when you see a dead body there. In this group, a group of paranormal investigators in a modern day society, this is something that in time that they've got to kind of get used enough to seeing to be able to do stuff with. And really, there are some parties that are just really that are just especially used to this. I mean, we have a medical doctor on the scene as well as an investigator who, memory serves, I think you have my crime scene investigation enough experience that you've probably seen these things that Peter isn't gonna go running, fleeing at the sight of a dead body either. So that's something I want to kind of get more into in the future. But regardless of the reason, so I kept it to a kind of a horror factor of 10, which really wasn't a hard, isn't much of a hard challenge for anyone to make. And even then, I wouldn't have had them, freaking out or pissing themselves or doing something humiliating like that. That's just, that's more comedic than anything else. And that's not the vibe I was going for. As I remember writing is something, a man. What this came down to is, the notes that I had was a man was on the bed who had died of a sudden death drug overdose from crack cocaine. On the nightstand is a straight hollow glass tube with a round bulbous end, and the tube has brown residue along it, while the bulbous end is covered in black burns marked on the outside. And several small baggies and rubber bands lie scattered around the bed and nightstand. I'll have it noted here as that as kind of a living proof moment that I really do listen to my players as we go. I want to note that the junkie was actually only going to have a simple Bic lighter in his hand as a sign. It's kind of like a sign of his poverty. But somebody in the group had mentioned the idea of him having like a nice Aerosmith engraved Zippo, and I just, all right, yeah, hell, I'll roll with it, and I think it rolled pretty high, so just, screw it, I'm gonna go with that. And the more I thought about it as they were all talking, the more I really kind of liked the idea of that. It kind of added some more depth to this guy, and if Kirk had gone the seance route, I actually would have added in that backstory of, this guy being like an old roadie who was destroyed by his addictions and inner demons. And, who knows, if we had the time, I might have even included a literal demon involved with all that, because I do have, like, entities and demons and such that basically feed on addictions, which at the end of the last episode we did, in one of Peter's groups, I actually gave them kind of a snippet of that, where, people dealing with addictions, or sometimes, not always, but sometimes in the world of BTS, they are being influenced by forces outside their awareness or control. Let's see here. And I was, let's see here. I was going to make it I originally had thought about doing just a straight up perception roll. But as Cass wasn't distracted by the body as the other two were, as they were kind of all going over their crime scenes and autopsy informations and whatnot, I decided to make sure that Cass got the spotlight moment to realize that Zia is not in the apartment entry door like she was supposed to be. So, Cass, think, where is Zia? She was right here a moment ago. Where did she go? And that led eventually to the scene where when they had looked through the apartment doorway across the hall, where the door had originally been shut, was now standing wide open, and Zia was standing in the right in the middle of the apartment, in the inside that apartment, and the door was now wide open. So, kind of another behind-the-scenes note on that. So the two harmful class entities in this apartment, they are brand new. They were presented for the first time in this particular adventure. I was actually designing and refining them right up until game time, to be honest. I've got stats and info on them, but they're considered rare at this time, and I didn't want to give away too much info about them, not even their name types yet, until the investigators go on a real ghost hunt involving them. They were a way to give the group a hostile situation to deal with. While Zia was influenced by them, they were not the main focus of this adventure, so I did not go too far into that. That being said, I personally really liked how this scene played out. Arguably is my favorite moment of the whole game, of this whole adventure. It gave Baldwin, Cass, and Peter a chance to help Zia for a change, because it's usually the other way around. And it gave the non-psychics a chance to deal with ghostly beings via physical bodies made out of ectoplasm, and it presented Cass with an opportunity to see how important his psychic mediumship is, as he witnessed the terrified spirit of Melanie finally freed from the ghost of her horrible husband. Even in death, he had continued tormenting her for more than 50 years, and I felt that her saying thank you to Cass before fading away in her newfound freedom was about as poignant as it really gets for RPG scenes. I don't know if Nick has a thought or comment on that or not, but I actually thought that particular scene played out really well. So, hopefully, I really hope Kirk kind of latches onto that vibe with Cass, that, what he does, whether you're alive or dead, his work, is particularly important, even if it is freeing spirits from more hostile spirits. And I kind of hope he kind of taps into that and seeks it out more. And, maybe it's even a way for Cass to kind of help deal with his inner demons and that voice inside his head that's getting ever more present. And the fact that, really, I think, Cass, he's starting to spaz out on an occasional point that I'm beginning to worry about him a little. But maybe that's something he'll hook into. Also, while I am on this subject, it was right here that we had ended the game that night, and as fate would have it, we didn't play again for weeks due to bad weather and illnesses. So by the time we got back to playing, I felt it was worth it to write out what had taken place in the last few moments. And it wasn't for the podcast listeners. Well, actually, really, it was just as much for the podcast listeners as it was for the players. Because probably you podcast listeners by now are probably just kind of rapid fire listening through all these. So for you, it would have only been mere moments ago that you heard what was happening in the last episode. Where with the rest of the group, it'd been probably about a month and a half, I think. It was a really long stretch of time. And I was like, no one's going to remember what the hell we were doing. So I ended up writing like a 2-page intro to get everyone back into the vibe of things. And, help kind of get back in their characters' heads after being away for so long. And it was also, to serve to help Shannon get an idea of what was happening to her character while she was away. And while I'm on this subject, it is important to me as a GM for Beyond the Supernatural that the atmosphere, the tone, and vibe of the game should be reminded to the players, as regularly as you can. Granted, there's times I wonder if this particular group isn't quite as interested in the atmosphere and vibe as so much as past players I've hosted, but it is still your job regardless as a GM, as a BTS GM. I want to say that 3 times fast. It is still your job to always try to deliver the atmosphere. And I'm not gonna read the whole bit on what like I said, it was about a 2-page intro, and I'm not gonna read all that here. You guys can go back and listen to that episode if you need to. But I went through the whole thing of the last few minutes. They were wrapping up an impromptu crime scene. They were going over the cadaver and what they had found on him. The Zippo with the Aerosmith logo on it. They had what the conclusion of that was. Cass realized that that she's missing. Giles, his spirit guide, had spoke up to him. A quick note to that: somebody had actually asked if Giles was a reference to Buffy, and actually it was not. When Giles was being designed as his spirit guide, Cass and I were, actually Kirk was not supposed to have any true impact on what his spirit guide's history was. That's more the GM's job. And I went with the angle of he was one of the unfortunate victims of the Salem witch trials because he was ahead of his time as an alchemist and mathematician, and so on and so forth. So really, he was a smart guy in a time that just did not appreciate him, and it was his similar head for math and whatnot that attracted him to Cass, and it was, and therefore it was Giles who had kind of helped him find his path and eventually become the a mathematician and astrophysicist that he is now. But actually, Giles was one of the names of the people that had actually that had been. The last name's different, but there was a Giles amongst the roster of, basically victims, is really no other way of looking at it, that had taken place during the Salem witch trials. So, and it's a name I just kind of liked, so I decided Giles was going to be his first name. So those of you wondering, it was not a Buffy reference, that was actually a name of a dude involved in the witch trials. Getting back to where I was... so Giles pointed out, oh dear, Cass, where did your athletic friend wander off to? She was standing there but a moment ago. Cass, Peter, Baldwin go looking for her. They find the door to apartment 2A is no longer, apartment 2B is wide open. Z is standing there. They ended up having their fight with the twin. With the twin entities that attacked them with a belt that had glowed. I'd kind of, while it turned out that no one actually got struck by one of the belt lashes, I almost kind of wish that one of my players had, because there would have been, even beyond the physical benefits, there are effects of it. There would have been additional effects on top of it, so we never got to go into that. But, and I'm sure all the players are happy they didn't get lashed, but the point is, there would have been extra weird stuff that would have happened because of it. And it didn't happen. But anyway, in unison, both of these plasmic bodies, attacked the dudes. Investigators fought them. Cass had managed to actually destroy the entity that he was fighting, while the other two had destroyed the ectoplasmic body enough of the other one that he eventually just kind of faded away into nothing. And at the end of all of that, yeah, the ectoplasm on his body evaporating quickly, Cass noted that he had destroyed the entity he was fighting via his Spirit Strike ability, while the other entity, now nothing more than an energy sphere the size of a grapefruit that only Cass could see, had fled through the apartment wall, no longer a threat to them without a physical body. Then Cass watched the woman in the corner slowly stand up and come out from behind the armchair. Dressed in 40s or 50s era clothing, she looked beaten and bloodied. Thank you. Darren would have killed me. And with a simple "you're welcome" from Cass, which Kirk's "you're welcome" response, I think was actually one of the finest bits that he has done as Cass yet. I could really hear it in Kirk that he was into it, and I encourage it. The more you can get into your characters, the better. So with a simple "you're welcome" from Cass, she faded into a simple orb that floated through the outside wall, leaving the apartment and investigators behind her. And then I had a note about, what Zia's, with a shaken knee-jerk reaction, Zia's head jerked straight up, gasping loudly for air, coming to life. She grabbed her head, wavering as if dizzy and about to fall to the floor, so the group helps her out. She states that she has no memory of what happened to her. She just feels simply exhausted, and her head feels drained. Her head's a little swimmy, as if she's taken too much cold medicine. And that's where we started that next episode. Zia's resting on the old couch. She's getting, helping as she gets her head back together. While the rest of the group checked out the rest of Apartment 2B. Apartment 2B, where again, it was similar shapes and information as all the others. Anything of value looks to have been taken long ago. And let's see, but I did also make a note there was considerably more water stains and damage in this apartment compared to the others. And this was where I had Edmund chime in. Peter, your radio crackles to life with a static blast, followed by Edmund's voice. Hello, Peter. Anyone? We heard gunshots. What's going on in there? It sounds like he's made numerous attempts to reach you, and he's growing concerned. A common aspect of paranormal encounters in my game is dealing with electromagnetic disturbances. It's a common trope you see in a lot of ghost movies and on television and such, and it kind of makes for an easy solution or resolution as to why it's so hard giving evidence in paranormal investigations and beyond the supernatural. Video footage is usually affected. It's full of static, or you can't quite see anything really that you're looking at. The electronics around you are going on the blink. Radios will pick up static, and sounds. Radio will pick up more static and strange ghostly sounds more than anything else and the like. It's not really anything that be considered evidence in any way, shape, or form. And this is the nature of Edmund's concern as Peter's radio and electronic gear ceased to function while the entities were present. And add to the fact that Baldwin's gunshots could be heard from outside the building, Edmund was concerned and had been trying to reach them during the fight but couldn't. Once Edmund was able to speak to Peter and get updated, he was my GM voice to get the group back into investigation mode. And before I kind of get into that, GMs always try to think about what your NPCs, if they're not, in the immediate area, but they're somewhere nearby, kind of like where Edmund and Hannah are sitting in the van. If they hear gunshots and things like that, and they're sticking through radio contact, ask, even if it's just for a second, ask them, hey, is everything okay? It kind of helps keep the flow of the game, or kind of reminds them that hey, the NPCs are nearby. Any bystander or any passerbys and such, think about this stuff, and if it's something that might make the game more interesting, people might respond. I could have even had it here where somebody could have been passing by, and Edmund might even said somebody was walking down the sidewalk just now, and they heard your gunshots. You might want to consider picking it up. They might have called the police. I mean, something things like that would. Those are all valid options and such that, keep in mind that whatever the characters are doing, there are things happening around them and getting them involved in that without overdoing it, because again, it's all about the characters. It's bits and pieces like that can make the game far more interesting. So I made this a very responsive moment for Edmund to help get the players back into investigation mode after being, again, we hadn't been doing this the last month and a half. I wanted to try to get him focused, and this was a way for me to do it. So once Edmund spoke and was able to get an update from Peter, I had him speak up. As a reminder, Edmund has been a parapsychologist for decades now, and knows what he's talking about. So yeah, interesting. Give me a moment to do some research down here before you continue. In the meantime, Peter, as the team's parapsychologist, you should be making notes and inquiries about what you all just experienced, and including an examination of Zia, as she just experienced a close encounter with entities. I added this note as I saw this moment as a chance for the group to use a few of their skills and get some info on what was happening. We have two non-psychic skill-savvy characters in the medical Dr. Genius and the parapsychologist, so I need to present these opportunities to them. And so I did. I made sure that they were rolling. This is kind of a GM me thing personally, trying to speed up the scene. This is kind of a, every GM seems to want to do this interesting. They always want to do it differently. I've been at tables of other BTS groups who are like, so any skills that you think might be pertinent to consider rolling under? Or some GMs will state, if you want to use skills, you tell me at the time and make rolls, and I'll tell you if anything comes of it. I sometimes do that, but again, I'm dealing, I'm working with a particularly savvy group that, I could go as far as say, hey, give me the skills you think would be interesting, but then, they're all going to be going, well, does this one do any good? Does that one do any good? So to kind of help save time, and again, to get them more involved in the investigation aspect as opposed to, skill checking, I specifically state, if any of those of you with parapsychology, psychology, or medical doctor, these are all success, you particularly useful skills, make rolls into those. That's generally my GM style. There are times I say, hey, anyone have any skills they think would be useful here just to get them thinking, but in this case, I was trying to keep the flow of the game going and get them back into investigating, so I kind of gave them the direction to start looking at. And I'm pretty sure I'd have to go back and listen, but I think at the time I did not give any penalties or what have it. Most of this was going to seem pretty obvious stuff. But the long and short of it, it was all about, when they were looking over Zia, in fact, kind of reading the bit here, she has a very rapid heartbeat, her pupils are dilated, and she's already expressed that her stomach's cramping up. Her body is still shaking, and her knees are still wobbly, and her clammy skin's quickly forming a layer of sweat. It's as if she's experienced an event that heavily stimulated her adrenal gland, similar to the effects of experiencing a panic attack. This is strange, as she was oblivious through her entire paranormal experience, nor has she any memory of the event to trigger such a response. So what would have triggered it? At some point, I think I was waiting for... I don't recall if I asked somebody specifically, but what I was looking for in this case was like a lore, entities, and skill related role, and I think Kirk was the one who answered this, where it states that many entities are known to be psychic vampires. It's entirely possible that the entities fed on Zia's ISP while influencing or controlling her body. It's possible that they're affecting her unknowingly, made it easier to absorb her psychic energy. This response is likely her body's way of dealing with the experience of having her psychic energy stolen from her. And I made sure that this info was available to point out that it is a common attribute for entities to steal and siphon ISP from psychics, and that Zia, while being under their influence, would have made her susceptible to this. And I know it kind of sucks to think that, she wasn't even here, and she's got she's having ISP stolen from her. But again, all of my players know if you're here, or if you're not here and you want your players to attend, they have equal opportunity of things happening to them as the rest. So I did make a note that Zia, you do indeed feel emotionally drained, as if having dealt with an extremely stressful and exhausting day. On a more meta note, Zia was indeed a victim of a parapsychic vampires, and while your ISP had increased 248 as a response to the entities, they each stole 20 ISP from you, reducing your total down to 8. What this means is that your base ISP is currently 8 ISP, and that the number you will multiply if and when we encounter another supernatural danger until you've had time to rest or meditate to raise that number. This kind of goes into that playing, there's kind of a numbers game you can do with when dealing with ISP. And in theory, after the after the times 4 had gone away, it could have gone right back to a 0, and she would have had an 8, and then when something else had happened, it might have gone to a ×2, bringing it to a 16, and then if that had gone away, she probably would have been back to about normal. But as fate would have it, they were still in a dangerous place, and when the ×4 went away from the entities, it actually would have gone back to the ×2 investigative mode. So even at that ×2, that 8 was all she had to work with. So I really wanted to make sure she understood that was happening. And again, I know it kind of seems like dirty pool doing it to a player that wasn't here, but her character has to suffer the same dangers as anyone else. So that's what happened there. Nick, edit here. Brought to you by Doritos. As much as I eat the things, I should get them on the payroll, right? And you know what? I would pimp the ever-loving shit out of that. Guys, you want to go to Pizza Dudes? Nah, dude, just give me a bag of Doritos. I'm good. I would have an NPC who would have the munchies all the time for Doritos if that was the case. Brah, want some Doritos? Alright, so Nick, re-edit here. So, after I had the note with Zia so she understood where things were at, I had a moment where Dr. Smythe had chimed in and kind of talked about it, where he did some quick research online and found some notes concerning a Darren and Melanie Whitley, and kind of got into some bits and pieces and details on her life. There are some pretty morbid people out there who love doing fan websites of like past crime things, scenes and such that have happened in their towns. And that was kind of the angle I was going with this, was with a little bit of research, they were actually able to find information on Darren and Melanie and what have you. And there was also another website out there that notes rumors of this particular building being haunted years before it had closed. And I was using Edmund here as kind of a mouthpiece to bring up a point to the group that they actually could have found that information all for themselves at a time if they had researched the building before they had come in. And in their defense, it might have been possible they figured, well, Dr. Baldwin's guy had told them to find the vampire in this building, and maybe they didn't think, or maybe they assumed he had it researched, but he didn't. He just told, hey, I found the guy in here. He's your problem now. Kind of an angle, since he really wasn't paid to dig any deeper. But yeah, I kind of took this as an opportunity to point out to everyone, you can do research on buildings and other things like this ahead of time. As I had actually all the info on Darren and Melanie back at the beginning of the adventure, had they had looked at that, it might have kind of added an extra bit of, understanding and information when they had ended up dealing with these particular entities. But again, this is a pretty investigative, pretty investigation-heavy game. So there's times I feel that the group could get a little more investigative, and so I like to remind them that it's useful to be in the know on this stuff. So I had Edmund bring this info up that you guys this could have been stuff you'd have seen beforehand. I also took this moment to hand a note to Nick to read as Peter to present a parapsychologist's point of view to what just happened. And actually, full disclosure on that one, I actually gave Nick like that note, I don't know, like a couple of days ahead. Yeah, I think almost like on a Tuesday, where we usually don't have our thing until Thursday, so I could give him time, if you wanted to kind of write it through the Peter's mouthpiece, as it were. And I think you kind of stated as you wrote it was pretty much how Peter would have said it anyway. So he just kind of went and he read out, his theory of what it was that was experienced. It was a neat bit on his part with Peter. So I'm not going to read it here for you guys. Get on the podcast and check out the episode. Listen to Nick Peter it up, and which. That didn't sound like it. Yeah, that sounded a little wrong. That was not what I was going for. Lord, I apologize. But anyway, he had a, I made sure to hand him a bit of information so he can come off sounding nice and parapsychology-like, without me having to read this stuff to him and for him, because I don't want to read all this stuff to everyone all night. I like to have them kind of add their own bits and play to their character strengths. So it seemed like the right thing to do was to give him a note going into the whole parapsychologist angle of what was likely happening in that room, explaining about the whole pain and suffering of, and the lingering of Melanie's psychic impressions have drawn harmful class entity types that had latched on the Darren's impressions, psychic impressions, so on. And then I added a note that regardless, it's surprising these impressions would linger here for so long. But what else could these entities have been latching onto if not their psychic impressions? This is a great time for me to mention that I love peppering hidden stuff into all of my adventures, and I had extra stuff in this apartment. If Cass had pursued Peter's note or train of thought about what the spirits might have been latching onto, he would have found what it was. Had Cass made the effort, or if the group had searched the floor nearby the armchair, or performed a fine contraband skill, or whether it was successful or not, as long as they made the effort, I was going to, I had a note for him that you would miss it if you weren't looking for it. But you can feel one of the floorboards under the filthy old carpet wiggle ever so slightly, like a child's tooth starting to come loose. And should they had ventured further with that and cut away the carpet and whatnot, I had a note that was cutting into and removing the carpet that was covering it. The snug but wiggly, dusty wooden floorboard is revealed. There is a small note in the end of the floorboard, or small notch in the end of the floorboard, where you can imagine a dainty finger or two could just get under it and lift it up. And under the floorboard, covered in a thick layer of dust, is a small and plain-looking diary with the name Melanie and the year 1949 written on it. If examined, or should they have examined or skimmed through that, I actually had notes here detailing Melanie's last year was one full of chaos and terror. She was a descriptive writer, and all the psychological signs are there that Darren would one day snap. Mental and physical abuse, accusations, alcoholic rages, and the like put her in a place where she was too terrified to do anything else but continue taking the abuse. The day she died, she was writing about how he went into a jealous rage the night before over a man named Connor who worked at a nearby grocery store. She swore she only ever saw him when she shopped there, and she expressed that she could never cheat on Darren, but he was certain that she was, and he would take his anger out on her for it. Melanie continued to describe how Darren had lashed and whipped her with his belt until she'd locked herself away in their bedroom. While she cried in a huddled mess in a corner, Darren shouted from the other side of the bedroom door that he's sleeping on the couch to make sure she doesn't sneak past him and leave or go to see Connor in the night. And the last sentence she was writing stopped midway as if she were interrupted. And then I had a psychic vision that Cass would have underwent, where basically he's kind of getting we would kind of get a visual of the last few moments of her life as he was coming at her, sort of a thing. It wasn't graphic, but it was enough to get to him that really what a monster this guy was, and it was just to help drive home the idea of that he actually did fantastic work finally freeing her of those monsters. A man who was tormenting her both in life and death. I also had a bit. There was wrapped in a kind of like a table napkin. There was about $20 worth of fives and singles that it looked like she'd been squirreling away in her plans to one day flee from Darren. And the bills were circa 1950s and could make either interesting souvenirs or keepsakes of the experience, or it could be sold to a collector for, $30-35 maybe. So I always try to pepper in little bits and pieces throughout my adventures, but I leave it to the players to find them. Because that's just how I roll. And after that, group goes to the third floor. Identical to the lower rooms, the stairs that lead to the 3rd floor are winding and turn halfway up. When you reach the midpoint turn, however, you find that the steps are littered with heaps of debris and splintered sections and pieces of wood. Looking up, you see that the stairs to the 4th floor have collapsed. Not only does this make climbing the rest of the way to the 3rd floor a treacherous feat, but it makes access to the 4th floor inaccessible in this manner. Identical to the floors below, there are 2 apartment doorways on this floor. One door has 3A etched on it, while the other door to apartment 3B lies in a broken heap on the floor. And in Cass, you detect a slight tinge of musk in the air, while the smell of garlic is getting stronger. Musk is a representation of supernatural predators present, and the smell of garlic getting closer means that they were getting closer to the vampire's apartment on the 4th floor. So, checking out apartment 3A, that door was locked. And when I think they checked the other one, apartment 3B first, but specifically in my notes, apartment 3A, this is apartment while showing all the signs of water damage, decay, defacing, and destruction as the lower floors. There are also signs of recent activity here, and I had everyone make a perception roll. It was a pretty easy one to make, but it was purses, coats, shoes, and other women's clothing and belongings are scattered about the apartment on the various furniture in clumps and heaps. And somebody, I think it was Kirk, had the wardrobe and grooming skill, I think, and he got flack for it. You know, no one realized Kirk was so metrosexual. But the point is, all of the clothing looks to be current trends and the kinds favored by 20-something Seattleites. My behind-the-scenes note here was that the clothing and items here is the first sign that Julian's activities in the building. And as the group will find out later, there is a devil serpent tongue living in the apartment upstairs. The monster and the vampires using the buildings were basically roommates of convenience. And for reasons yet unknown, Julian has been keeping his numbers low. He's not turning every woman he influences to the building into vampires. He and the others apparently at this time are simply feeding on them, and then their bodies are being given to the serpent tongue to basically eat and dispose of. So he's kind of their monstrous garbage disposal. So it was kind of a roommate system that was working out. So the players had to go and wreck that. Yeah, just had to go and destroy the garbage disposal. They don't think about anyone but themselves like that. What about the vampires, man?
That's how we do it. It's all about us.
So, that was my hint droppings with the that they were getting close to the vampire activities. I had the group gotten into that a little bit more, I might have even given like psychic flashes or something to a cast about, you know, that basically the women, for whatever their various ways, are being lured there. Perhaps they were escorts or prostitutes, or they were under the influence of vampires. Whatever their reason would be, they were basically being led up to this particular apartment, where they would consequently, you know, all be drained of blood by whatever vampires were in the building at the time, and body would get disposed, and all their clothing articles and such that were being left behind were were just simply kind of being casted here as a place to just keep it out of, keeping interested parties away from it, keeping it behind locked doors, as it were. So that's really what this room was all about. Apartment 3B, the door to this apartment lies in shattered remains upon the ground. And with a perception roll, I actually had sometimes I have a simple perception roll, or basic and advanced roll. It goes on, and depending on what people roll, I have like basic info, and then I'll have like deeper info. And no one had actually rolled high enough to get the deeper info, but I know at least one person had the basic, where it states it looks as if someone with incredible strength had kicked or shoved it in. But I actually had a second level note that says this looks like it was a recent activity, aka there wasn't like layers of dust on it, like this stuff had been sitting here for a while. That was actually something that had happened within the last day, and that was kind of a prelude to what the group was going to find in this particular room. This apartment looks confusing, to say the least. While all the signs of being derelict and run down are here, The furniture looks to have been cleaned and set up to act as a living space recently. For example, the dining room table rests on the floor upright, and all the chairs are placed under it except for one that sits out like someone had been sitting there recently. Signs of dust trails on its surface can be seen, as if someone took the time to brush aside a layer of dust and dirt. On the dining room table is a bright green neon reusable grocery bag. This doesn't fit in with the rest of the surroundings. Sitting next to it is a half-empty bottle of soda. The whole angle that I was going with here was kind of pointing out that there's not necessarily supernatural activity going on in this building. Sometimes our heroes are going to go places that just as much, or they can find dangerous human activity going on as much as anything else. Because when they checked the bag inside a Rubbermaid container, they found what looked like basically they found baggies of crack cocaine that was ready to be sold. And I added that suddenly the mood here has changed. This apartment is being used as a crack house, and you are rifling through a dealer's stash. And I made a note to add that people have gotten killed for less. It's very true. And what the group, I don't know if the group actually cared or bothered to look into the note, but at one point, I think, in fact, it was Baldwin, that when they were on the 4th floor, at one point the door opened, and a dude that was obviously under the influence of a vampire came out and was about to shoot Baldwin, and saying under his breath, "I'm sorry," before Baldwin, kind of overkilled his hand, and then he bled out to death. That guy was actually our said crack dealer. This was the crack dealer had plans on making use of this place as a convenient spot to sell his drugs from, but he kind of went to the wrong place at the wrong time, was found by vampires, and was turned, and was put under the hypnotic suggestion, and was kind of acting as his Renfield, if you will, or one of his enslaved people in the building at the time, because you can't immediately turn somebody into a vampire. You always have to go through the 3-day process. So, being as this had happened the last day, and that was going to be one of the clues with the doorway being smashed in, but it was a recent event. I was treating that as basically an upset vampire at this guy's intrusion, who had been straightening up the apartment, starts selling his crack in. Again, busted in the door, nabbed this guy, and turned him into one of his zombie slaves, as it were. And carried him, or jumped with him up to the 4th floor, and then had used him as a puppet later on that evening. So that's what that was all about. That's kind of a behind the scenes for y'all there. I don't know if Nick had quite, or anyone actually for that matter, had caught on to that that's who this guy was. I'm pretty sure all they saw was a enslaved human with a gun aiming at him, and that was all they really needed to know at the time. But that was where I was going with that. I don't try to come up with just random enemy things that just happen. I always try to add in some kind of background story or details. Why the hell this is going on? It's not D&D where you can just you can be a wandering murder hobo going through dungeons, and there's just stuff that happens to be down there doing the same thing, and you slay them all. It doesn't quite work that way in a modern setting. You kind of generally need a reason for people being where they're at. And that's what this guy was doing. Vampires obviously have no interest in the crack cocaine and just kind of left the bag behind when they took the dealer. So that was what they were. That was what they had going on there. I had actually considered when I had originally, because I knew early on I wanted to kind of have this angle of potentially one of these apartments had a crack dealer, or that it could have been a crack house, kind of an angle. But the more I started writing, that didn't really make as much sense, because I really didn't see vampires allowing crack dealers and junkies coming in and out of the apartment complex all day. I just in my head, especially in the case of Julian, because he is not. It should have been one of the things I hope that the group had kind of walked away with in the end, is that Julian is not a diabolic alignment type. He's kind of more, I think aberrant's the word for him. He seems to kind of have a little more of a sense of code behind what he's doing. And he, but I think regardless of the alignment, they weren't going to just stand for these people coming in and out of the building all day, kind of funking with their flow. So that idea kind of got scrapped, because I think the plan was when they had found this bag at some point later on, the dealer and like a few of his thug buddies might have actually come in, had found their way coming back into the building, coming to pick up their stash or what have you. Like I said, that the idea just didn't really pan out, so I scrapped that idea early. But I love the idea of the vampires making enslavement uses out of them. So that was kind of really what that was all about. And I think at some point, I also coincidentally I actually found it somewhere in my notes and about this section, because I would have thought I'd have put it down a little lower in my notes, but it was about here I found that I actually added a note that I wanted to put a random encounter, in somewhere in this section if things had been going too quietly. And one of my favorite random characters to show up, or random monsters to show up when things are too quiet, are dimensional ghouls. What's great about dimensional ghouls is they can kind of pop up anywhere at any time, literally just kind of fade into existence suddenly via like a dimensional door shift. And they are attracted by various places for various reasons, and all the PPE, the ambient PPE, kind of kicking around in the air from people being turned into vampires and monsters eating and so on and so forth, is a great way to lure dimensional ghouls to the area. So had things had been quiet for far too long, I actually had a note that they were going to be kind of my random monster scene. But really, things kind of flowed pretty smooth this whole adventure that I really didn't have to go that angle. But I saw it there, so I thought I would mention it to all of you guys for behind-the-scene purposes. And then the stairs of the 4th floor, those were actually broken intentionally by the vampires to keep people from getting to the 4th floor. The serpent tongue could actually reach people from the 3rd floor if it needed to via the tentacles. I think they got a reach of like 30 some odd feet if they wanted to. And the vampires can easily make the jump from the 3rd to 4th floor if desired, so the scene with Zia climbing the walls via her knives and then using her rope to let the others up, it was actually a pretty fun, bit of like an RPG scene to have. And again, shows off the strength and capability of Zia, because, Shannon and her physical, psychic wisdom pretty much took about as many physical, talents as she could, and made good and sure climbing was one of the skills she had in there. So, and it kind of, which coincidentally, her climbing the walls and then, bringing down the rope for the others made a great opportunity to kind of ambush, start an ambush with the serpent tongue's tentacles coming at her from the darkness of the giant hole in the wall of that apartment. I thought it was actually kind of a neat scene of how it all worked out, and I was particularly glad that it worked out as well as it did. So now, if I have any regrets about this scene, or really about this entire adventure in general, it's that I didn't anticipate and therefore really did not do any researching on fire escapes beforehand. I really did not consider that Baldwin and Peter would have the idea or consideration of running up, rusty, beat up fire escape steps. I would have, I thought I might have sold that as being, treacherous enough that they wouldn't try it, but they did. And I think I brought this up in the following episode a week later, that I just realized that, again, I have been doing modern day RPGs since probably about, I'm going to say close to the year 2000. Because I know I was doing Nightbane on for a while and such too. So Heroes Unlimited before that, Ninja Turtles. I mean, I've done plenty of modern settings that arguably it probably is closer to the 30 years than not that I've been doing these, and not once have I ever actually had anything that really took place on a fire escape before. So when they brought it up, it actually kind of caught me off guard. As to how to go about doing that. So I just kind of treated it as having them step up and roll to see if something would happen to them as they were would one of the steps bend or give way or what have you. What was kind of how I left that off. But as I felt kind of I almost felt kind of naked that I had gotten to a point that I just know so little about fire escapes. I've lived in a couple of different apartments, but but all the apartments I lived in were always new enough that none of them had fire escapes. We always had the main stairwell, which were up to a fire code enough that you didn't have to run down a fire escape. You would escape, through the stairwell. It's all supposed to have the fire retardant walls and cement and all that stuff. So generally they were considered safe enough to race down. I've never actually, and to this day, I have never stepped actually on a fire escape, so I just really don't know a whole lot about them. As a behind-the-scenes moment for everyone on this, I actually ended up doing a lot of research, about fire escapes. And I ended up going over a lot of material online, and I even ended up reading a couple of different college papers concerning the history, the present, and the future of fire escapes. I read all about, how they kind of got their start in New York as an outcry to the shantytown building that went up in smoke, and basically these people were all just trapped in this building with no way of getting out, and that was kind of where, I went through all of this stuff. And by the end of it, I had enough information acquired that I'm actually going to kind of write up it's probably going to be like a 2 or 3 page blurb concerning how to use fire escapes, and I'll have it added to the website once I've finished with it. Because if this has happened to me at some point, one of you may have a situation on a fire escape that it'd just kind of be good to have the notes. They're kind of going the way of the dodo, since again, more modern day fire escape situations usually are usually all done through the main stairwells of in apartments and buildings and such. You really don't see them in new buildings anymore, but older buildings still do. But that was that bit for you. I'm sorry, where was I? And also the other thing that got to me on that was, after reading and going over all this, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have actually put the fire escape in the middle hallway window like I had. Actually how it would have worked, there would have actually been 2 different sets of fire escapes, and there would have been one on each side of the building in the back, as it were. And that would have actually changed the flow and the events of this scene, as Cass as Baldwin and Peter actually wouldn't. They would have had to end up going into apartment A to get up to 4B, where they would have been ambushed by the wild vampires right away. And really, in the flow of the game, that would have meant they probably would have had a difficult time just getting out of that apartment to get over and help Zia and Cass deal with the serpent tongue over in 4B. And, in retrospect, if they had tried getting to apartment 4B through the fire escape on 3B, they would have found that, that had been completely wrecked, which was something that the monster would have seen to, because I kind of alluded to the fact that this creature had knocked down the section of the wall to the apartment door, as well as, made a hole in the ceiling, and would have, again, really just destroyed all exits into the lair. For besides the easy reach for it getting out and doing its thing. So they would have had to ultimately go through apartment 3A's fire escape to get up to 4B, is how I would have seen that played out. But I didn't know that at the time, so the idea of putting one in the window of the middle stairway was the best resolution. That was the best I had at the time. So, again, as it happened, by the end of that episode, the group was surrounded by vampires after destroying the serpent tongue, and Zia had fallen under Julian's influence. So by the beginning of the next episode, I'm going to be honest with all you listeners here, I really wasn't sure what the hell was going to happen with this particular episode. I knew that Julian, unfortunately, I had a backstory with Julian long ago. I kind of knew this vampire, and I knew he wasn't the atypical vampire. There's things going on with him that the players have yet to be aware of. So what I can state with that is he is not quite a typical vampire, and he is different enough and has enough of an alignment that he felt that he owed a life debt to Baldwin for freeing him after he had been basically buried in wet cement in a building for the last 70 some odd years. Or, well, probably closer to 80. But the point is, he had been locked away all these years, and after he was finally freed and he recognized Baldwin's smell, as vampires are notoriously have really good senses of smell and can track by it and whatnot, that he would have recognized Baldwin's scent and felt that he owed him his life. There's other reasons too, but that is for the group to pick up at a later time. The group themselves had also, when they came in, they were convinced that there would only be that there was only going to be one vampire here. Maybe they didn't, but the way I was reading them, I don't think they expected to see more than one vampire in the building. And again, I wasn't going to, shoulder angel them, and I was like, this is strictly on their own doings. I made sure Edmund told them, they're treacherous, be careful, and I had left it at that. So whatever they thought they were going to find in there, in the end, there was not one vampire there, and suddenly they were dealing with overwhelming odds, and that was something they just were not prepared for. And I was concerned if the group really wanted to push their luck, and I actually thought something was about to get ugly. Baldwin had stated he was going to reload his weapon. I was like, he's gonna fire, and at that point, the vampires are gonna have to do something. Julian gave him his one. He understood it was an emotional moment. They were scared, and really one silver bullet wasn't gonna mean much to Julian, so he was able to let that go. I made a note that that he flinched barely, kind of a thing. So I was trying to point out that they were really in a situation that. It was about as dangerous an experience or dangerous of a moment as any of them had ever had. So I was thoroughly concerned that this potential group, this group might have all actually been killed off or turned into vampires. Because if it came down to a fight, in my head, any scene that I can think of. At least one, if not all of them, probably would have been overwhelmed at the end. They were outnumbered by vampires, I think like 4 or 5 to 1 towards the end. And they weren't prepared for that. So, let's see here. And that was why I made sure when I wrote the intro for the game that night, I made damn good and sure that the group had understood that that the group was not outright physically attacking them. I didn't start the adventure like, they're all coming at you, defend yourselves. No, I really wanted to make it a point that they understood that while they were surrounded, they even had the snapping, snarling, Julian referred to them as mutts, and that was a very conscious decision on my part. I don't know if the players were picking it up, but Julian almost kind of speaks with disdain for his own kind, and that might be kind of a key thing for them to look at a later time. He doesn't refer to them as his, as like, I think a lot of vampires refer to them as like brood or almost something like in their family. He refers to his, with almost terms that don't quite really dictate family, such I think like flock was a word I was using a lot. And he referred to the wild vampires that he had control of as his mutts. And I tried to get a negative connotation in that when I said it, as I felt it was important that the group saw where it was they were dealing with, and the fact that Julian wasn't quite out to immediately just off them all, as he wasn't attacking them right away. And we kind of had to let the scene play out. I even went as far, as Cass. I even had as far as Cass. Giles was talking, next to Cass, even stating his part of that is that, the odds are overwhelming, but they're simply standing around us. Why aren't they trying to kill you all? Let's see here. And I even had a point where Julian wanted to, was sure to make a note to the other group that were this any other situation, we'd all be feeding on you right now, siring the useful ones and destroying the rest. But you, Dr. Alec Baldwin, according to the cards you left on the table downstairs, I love presenting opportunities, and I'm listening to the players, and things are happening around them. So I made damn good and sure that he noted that he found the card on the business table, after they had left the room. I recognized you, or your smell at least. You had a hand in releasing me, so even after the naive courage to invade one of my nests in the middle of the night and destroying Sergeant Yates' serpent tongue pet. Side note to that, Sergeant Yates is another character that I've had for a long time, who seems to kind of work a lot, who's working alongside Julian. And he's the only one, I don't know if the group had picked up, he's really the only one that he's given, or that he's even referring to by name. Whether that means there's something in the hierarchy there, or if they're on a similar level, or mutual respect, or perhaps they were comrades in arms at one point. I'm leaving all of that for the characters to possibly find out themselves one day. But I was very specific that he seems to have one person that he speaks to amongst the flock with any real respect, which would be Sergeant Yates, which some of them remember as the vampire who swung a mean cavalry saber. So you invade one of my nests in the middle of the night and destroying Sergeant Yates' serpent tongue pet. I can't help but feel that either I owe you a life debt, or to sire you to my cause personally. I will add that I'm granting all of you a favor that none of you can truly appreciate by not letting you destroy me. That was kind of a line dropper for the group to kind of ponder over someday as well, because that doesn't sound like something you would expect a vampire to say. So how all that had played out in the end, they had their say. The group had decided to stand down in the end. Arnie had made a note that he was willing to fight this out if Zia hadn't been wasn't under the influence. And in that case, like I said, I would have let it play out to a grim confrontation if they pushed it, but really, I'm glad I didn't, because I'd hate to have such a. It probably somebody I'm sure would have fallen, if not the whole group. So, and secretly, I'm on the player's sides. Just because I'm out to kill them doesn't mean I don't love them all. Said it once and I'll say it again. I'm doing you all a disservice if I'm not trying to kill every one of you. So, there are still kind of aspects that I won't go into now, since the group as of the end of the last mission really hadn't gone into yet. But I will add that there are some additional notes and information and kind of basically clues that the group is going to be able to pick up by going over all the paperwork and the notes and such that they had taken from apartment 4B. After the vampires had let them go, he had kind of given them the warning that, your life, I've given you your life debt, but this is your one-time thing. There will, I catch any of you here again, kind of a thing. You're all enemies. He kind of gave him his fair warnings and stayed to leave him alone. He's got work to do, and then he disappeared. And whether consciously or not, he left behind basically an orgy of information all along the walls that shows that he has been busy with something, or he or his flock. They've been busy with stuff the last several months, and a lot of the culmination of that they were finding on the walls. I even added a note that they had found that there was a printer there. There was an old computer that had been destroyed that, from what I recall, Cass is going to look to somebody to have putting back together, or at least, using the hard drive to pick up details from, maybe get some info on what the hell was going on. All the paperwork had been picked up, which means I'll have to kind of sift through and, kind of try to make sense of what all was going on. So I had a lot of bits and pieces that if they had stayed there and looked at it all, they would have got it right then, but they opted to collect it, which is fine. In the end, they'll still get it all. Peter took good notes and even ruined the summoning circle on the floor, which probably should have served as a really strange and unusual clue for vampire activity, because what the hell would vampires really have any interest in summoning circles for? So, that's kind of information to pick up at on another time. And from there, that was also kind of keep the game flowing, as I brought up before, the group I'm planning, my intentions or plans for the summer was to have the group hang out in Totem Falls, for a murder investigation that appears to be supernatural related. And I'm not entirely sure the group's going to go with that or not, or if they're going to stay in town or what have you. That's strictly on their decision, and I will abide by whatever it is they decide to do. But really, as far as, that was kind of all the details really behind what I was doing behind this adventure. I was really thinking about what kind of villains that I had in there, what it was they were going to see in there, and why they were seeing it, as well as, to include a lot of flavor text so they get the vibe and idea of what it was they were looking at. And again, I tried to keep it to about just the right size, with having eight apartments there, which that, my friends, is the culmination of almost 30 years experience right there. Anyway, also before I go, I posted on the Facebook today this afternoon. I was telling people what it was that I was going to be recording this tonight, and if somebody had questions concerning the adventure that they specifically wanted me to confront, to bring it up now. So, and it actually turns out I did. I got 2 questions here from a Mr. Kyle. Shout out to you. Thank you for listening. I'm glad you're finding interest in the show. So, he has 2 questions for me. And one was, the first one is, do you come up with the main villain first and then add other monsters or enemies, or do you build the setting, in this case the apartment building, and then add the villains? I personally do some of both. I am curious on your writing style. Honestly, I think more often than not, I'm probably going to say about 80 times out of 100. I usually have my situation of what the main villain or situation is up front, and the adventures usually, and as far as how I write, is done around that. And I think what I was describing here that's exactly what was happening. The group was looking for a vampire. I knew this particular vampire they were looking at. I've had him written for some time, kind of sitting on the back burner. I know I already had his backstory and what his missions and goals are. So I already had all that set up, and then I just needed a place for them to find him. And the idea, again, with the NPC earlier with Abraham Capone, talking about the whole reason he found him was by looking over some of the old records at the Speakeasy. He had come across, so one of the names he came across was this Julian Cole guy. And he come to find out that he actually found that name in an unrelated reference on some other scanned public documents, which normally wouldn't make sense because they dated back to the 1920s, I think it was. That there was a man of the same name living in this apartment building, so kind of following that hunch, because any other average private investigator, they're not going to make that leap. They couldn't consider that leap. But this guy has been dealing with the paranormal long enough that he gets that it was plausible that there could have been someone 80 years ago still hanging around. That might be making use of the building for one reason or another. So, following his hunch, he checked it out. Come to find out, he was right. He took pictures, of gals going in with him, but he was always coming out, alone later on. So, he relayed all of that on the Dr. Baldwin. I needed a place to, for where would this vampire be hanging out. That might, and I like the idea of, again, as I know Julian pretty well at this point, especially as I've had a lot of time to think on him. He has a sentimentality, and at one point, he was living in that apartment building back when it was far newer, and when he was working at the Speakeasy, and I don't know if Baldwin actually brought it up, but I think at some point, the psychic medium. I think, we did have a psychic medium in the group that Baldwin was with at the time, who I think they were speaking to was the spirit of a Madame Lorna, who was kind of the gal that was operating the ladies of the night inside the Speakeasy, and she was the one in the end who actually seizing upon a moment of opportunity, learning what Julian had staked him. and had the concrete poured over a new portion of the building, and then he had been trapped there for the last 80 some odd years. There's a whole story and backstory behind all that. So what I needed there was why where would he find Julian, and why the hell would he remotely find him there? How was Abraham actually going to look him up and be able to dig this guy down? And that became my connection, was just following hunches and following the public paperworks. And that led to how this adventure got written up. So there are times where I get so entranced with a location that actually all the monsters and things that happen are happening around that. That sort of happened during the first adventure with this group, with the Pacific Hill Cemetery. Off the top of my head, like I said, I've talked a lot tonight, so my head's all over the place here. I kind of forget the reason why the hell this group even went to the cemetery now. Nick, do you remember what the hell we were doing at the cemetery that night?
We had oh no, we were ghoul hunting. I can't remember if we got a call.
Was it specifically a ghoul hunt?
Yeah.
I think now that you say it, I think you're right. I think honestly, and that's actually a great idea too. For you GMs, if you're absolutely strapped for adventure ideas, I mean, it does happen where, if you just need something to get the group kind of working together, or if you have absolutely no other adventure, one of the best notes that's in the whole entire BTS book is that grave ghouls are compelled to walk the surface of the during the full moon. And where the best place of finding grave ghouls is going to be in a graveyard, especially one that's currently active, because they don't like fresh meat. They like their bodies after they've kind of rotted and bloated for a while before they start eating them, which disgusts me. But hey, whatever they're into. But the point is, that's a in this case, I just needed a really good cemetery scene to have this group work with, and the Pacific Hills was a cemetery that I had used in the past once or twice, so I already had a rough idea what I wanted to do with it, but I'd never really written out as much info as I had before, and have since added onto the website. So yeah, 80% of the time it's all about the monsters and where you're at, and where it happens and what the adventure takes place, and kind of follows behind that logic. Sometimes in this case that I needed something to get the group together, and grave ghouls is an easy excuse to get newbies together practicing. Grave ghouls aren't particularly dangerous, unless they're in superior numbers against you. They're more often the run than the fight. So it's they're really good. They're really good novice enemy. Good for the novice investigators to deal with. So I think that about covers that question. So let me give me a second here. His second question was, also, what are your thoughts on the ISP modifiers? I personally am not a big fan. I feel it makes players want to conserve ISP too much in case it gets multiplied. I house rule that whenever a modifier appears, you get an increase of points based on what you would have at full ISP. For example, a character has 8 ISP. They use 4 using a psychic ability. Then they get a ×4 modifier. The character now has 28 ISP, when the math behind that is 8 × 4 = 32, and the 32 minus 4 of used ISP equals 28. Honestly, Kyle, I think we're kind of coming up with the same kind of numbers through different aspects. I don't see any. I have not really run across a group where I've had somebody super stingy with their ISP, and maybe it's how I'm treating how the ISP system works, and kind of giving you an example on that. We'll say psychic. Psychic diviners have always been my favorite types, so I'm just gonna go with that. Zane, my diviner. This is a good example here. Let's say he's got a base. His base ISP is 10. If there is no supernatural activity going on, he's only got 10 ISP to work with. And, as is stated in the book, he's only got about a 50-50 shot of his stuff even working, and even when it does, it's generally, underwhelming, uninteresting stuff. And it's one of those reasons, and it's one of those reasons why, again, people don't really believe in psychic ability, and in particular, psychics are inept under, when they're under scrutinization, asking to make stuff on demand. It just doesn't work that way. And the meta for how ISP works like that's actually really solid. The base isn't a whole lot of points to work with. Half the time it won't even work, and when they do, it's unimpressive, it's underwhelming. No one, who cares? It's not really something worth getting into. However, in a situation where there has been recent paranormal activity, so like Zane walks into the front door of, say, an abandoned apartment complex, let's say, following the theme here, he's looking for a vampire. The moment he steps foot into into this apartment complex, he immediately gets a ×2 adrenaline bump, which means that his ISP would now be 20. It's a ×2 jump when there's potential of recent paranormal events taking place. And we'll go with an argument that he uses an ability to investigate with that costs about 5 ISP. It brings him down to 15. Now, let's say by that argument, he decides for whatever reason to leave, and he walks out of the building, and that ×2 goes away. Since he had 10 or more points when he was at his ×2, it would go back to the ×10. However, let's say while he was in that ×2, he actually used, let's say, 10 ISP of his available, 15 ISP of that available 20 that he's sitting on. If he leaves the building and the ×2 goes away, he's only got the 5 points left over. And let's say later on he comes back that night, fully prepared, or has whatever gear he might not have had that he left with. With that 5, if he walks in and he's at a times and it goes back to a ×2, he's got his 10 ISP to work with. That's generally how I'll work with the it's basically a numbers game that if you do it right, in theory, you never really run out of it. And I think a lot of GMs, and I don't know if this is you or not, I think a lot of GMs don't catch that there's the ×2s as well as the ×4. The whole point of the ×2 is to allow players to use their minor investigative abilities to kind of help them investigate and detect and look for whatever supernatural activity was going on there. As long as he kept his points, at 10 or higher, let's say, he goes up to the second floor and holy crap, there's entities going on on that floor. The moment he starts a situation with them, if he's got 10 or more ISP, it automatically reverts back to his 10 base, and then it goes to the ×4 level for the entities, and then he's sitting on 40 points to work with. The long and short of that is he fights it out with these entities. He's slinging mental bolts and whatever else he has to fight at with these entities. If he had kept his points at 10 or higher, once the ×4 goes away, and depending on the situation, it's either going to go back to a ×2 if there's more enemies in the building, but for the sake of argument, we'll treat it that there's not. There's entities in this building. He's just exterminated a lot of them, or with help of others, that, the ×4 goes away. As long as he's got at least his 10 points, he's back at his base. He flung a bunch of stuff, but he didn't actually, in the end, you really didn't lose anything. And and if he went to another ×4, he can immediately jump back to a 40, or if another ×2 happened, he goes up to a 20, so on, so on. Going by that same argument I had earlier, if he had spent that 15 points during a ×2 and he was sitting with 5 left, if he had gone into that same room with the entities, that ×5 would then, or that 5 points he had remaining, that number is what would jump ×4, and now he's sitting with 20 ISP to work with. And as long as he kept his ISP at at least 10 by the end of that battle, then he's already, then by the time that ×4 goes away, he's sitting back at his base ISP. So really, there's no reason, as far as I would say, for psychics to really sit on your ISP, especially because of a modifier situation. I think modifying actually makes ISP, is probably one of the best things to ever happen to psychics, because in a lot of games like Heroes Unlimited, for example, playing psychics in that game, certainly you have some pretty high numbers for your ISP, and it's always available to you, but you don't really get modifier bonuses to allow your stuff to kind of to kind of get it to kind of help replenish faster. If you spend if you have a psychic with 150 points and you kind of shoot that whole wad during a battle with a bunch of villains, you're stuck at 0, and I don't remember how much they earn. I think it's like 6 or 8 an hour without some kind of special help. But you're gonna have to basically you're stuck, really until in that 8 or whatever it is you're getting an hour until you're back up to 150, and that could take a day or two for the really good psychics out there. Where I honestly think that the psychic modifiers, are a really good way of replenishing your energy a lot faster. But that comes with the backlash of when you're not in the presence of the supernatural, your psychic powers, they're inept, if not non-existent, is kind of the trade-off to that. So I do not agree at all with your with the people being stingy with their ISP. I encourage the psychics. You got this stuff for a reason. Use it. Make the best out of it. And I guess edit here. Alright, so, let's see, Nick, I guess, re-edit here. Alright, well, I think that probably puts us into a couple of hours worth of me giving you the yakety schmack, all the behind-the-scene thoughts and ideas and such that I had. I've answered questions, I've had a couple different tangents and ideas. Nick had a monosyllable grunt here there to add into his. Thank you, yes, that's exactly what I look for and expect from you, Nick. Couldn't ask for anything more.
That's all I do.
It's how he does. That's what I keep him around for. Because he's got, his grunts speak volumes, But okay, so I hope this answered, any kind of questions you might have had concerning the episode of why I was doing what I was doing. And I think I even kind of presented some extra bits that my players will probably ponder on down the road, because I'm sure it's not the last time they're going to be dealing with Julian. Let's see. So, kind of getting into the quick retrospect, I had it all set up based on they were all looking for a vampire. They found not only a vampire, they found a whole flock of them, and they found a whole bunch of evidence to go over at the end to kind of give them clues and ideas of what to do about him in the future from here. And maybe get some ideas of what it is that he's up to. Why the demon summoning circle? Why all this research paper is on the wall? What does it all mean? Who made that long distance call to Denver on Peter's cell phone? These are questions that they're going to be searching for. But with that, I guess this is Steven and Nick. Thank you again for that. Your grunts are fantastic, man. Yeah, but again, thank you for listening. If you like this or if you have additional questions, feel free to post them on the Podbeans, the Facebook, the Twitters. Again, I don't handle a Twitter account. That's Nick's thing, because Steve don't tweet. I think that's about all I got for this, and if all goes well, we'll be doing more of these in the future. With that, I say thank you and have a pleasant evening.